So today we're going to talk about the anatomy of the heart. Um, so first of all, if you were actually in physical lab, you'd see that we have different types of heart models. And we're going to use these even though we're not actually able to physically touch them. But we have two of them. One of them is life-sized. And a life-sized heart is about the size of a loosely clenched fist. So if you would, loosely clench your fist and look down at it. That's about the size of your heart. Now that doesn't include these blood vessels up at the top or anything like that, but it's the heart itself. This part is about the size of a loosely clenched fist. We also, though, in our lab, we have some very enlarged hearts. These are just much bigger than normal. They're about 4 times the size of a normal human heart. To give you an idea of this model, it's about the size of a giraffe's heart. Giraffes have really, really big hearts. And so that's about the size of that. Well, we're going to look at both of them. We're going to spend most of our time looking at the smaller one. So before we look at the heart itself, though, let's just remember that the heart is part of the circulatory system. And the reason the circulatory system is called that is because there are circuits. And a circuit is nothing but a circle. Well, it's not one circle, though. There are 2 circuits. There's one which starts at the heart and it goes to the lungs. In the lungs, we're going to drop off carbon dioxide and we're going to pick up oxygen and it's going to come back to the heart again. So that circuit is called the pulmonary circuit. And so if you look at it, the pulmonary circuit is going to take this low oxygen blood, which has been out to all your tissues. And in general, on models and pictures, when low oxygen blood is depicted, it's depicted as blue. So this is low oxygen blood. And so it's going to go to the lungs, it's going to drop off its carbon dioxide, it's going to pick up oxygen. And look, the color is going to change from this color to this bright, bright red color. So red on models and pictures is high oxygen blood. This high oxygen blood is going to come back to the heart. And then we're going to have another circuit. And so this circuit is going to take this high oxygen blood, it's going to send it out to all of your tissues. And then in your tissues, we're going to drop off our oxygen and pick up carbon dioxide and come back. And this is what's called the systemic circuit. So we have these 2 circuits. And the heart sort of sits right in the middle of these 2 circuits. Now, circuit means circle, but this literally looks more like a figure 8. But there are 2 of these. Any questions about that? And so when we look at this heart, it serves as a pump. And so it pumps into these 2 circuits. And so when you look at the heart, it's not one pump actually, it's 2 pumps. There's 2 circuits. And so one pump is the right side of the heart. So the right side of the heart is this side over here, the right side of the heart. And if you look at the right side of the heart, it's going to look quite different from the other pump, which is this one over here, which is the left side of the heart. And the reason they look so much different is because of these circuits. So let's look at the pulmonary circuit for just a minute. So remember, this is going to take that low oxygen blood and it's going to pump it to the lungs. Well, think about it. How far away are the lungs from the heart? If you think about where the heart is, here's your chest. And here's the heart right here, and here are the lungs right next to it. So the distance here is very short. So it's a short loop, it's a short distance. Not only that, there's another thing. Lungs are filled with air. And air does not cause much resistance. It's low resistance. If you think about yourself running down the side of a swimming pool, not in the water, but next to it, outside in the air, you can run very, very fast because there's hardly any resistance in air. So we have a short distance, we have low resistance. Well, what that means is we're not going to be required to have as much pressure. So the right side of the heart is a low pressure pump. And because it's a low pressure pump, we're not going to need much muscle. And so it's going to have less muscle. And so when we look at it, the walls are going to be thinner than those on the left side. So that's this pulmonary, the right side of the heart. This one right here, the right side. On the other hand, if we look at the left side of the heart, here's the left side over here, and the left side is pumping out into the system. It pumps it all the way up to your head. It pumps it out to your fingers and your toes and all that. And so the distance here is a very long distance. Not only that, if you're going to pump up to the head, you have to pump against gravity. Remember, gravity's pulling things down, so we're going to have to pump against gravity. And we're not pumping through air. If we go back to our analogy of the swimming pool, you're not running beside the swimming pool. You're actually in the water trying to run. And think about how much harder it is to run in water than it is to run in air. And so the resistance is much higher. So there's a long distance. You're pumping against gravity. There's a lot of resistance. And so we're going to need a high pressure pump. We're going to need a high pressure. And the only way you can make high pressure is if you have a lot of muscle. And so the left side has a much greater amount of muscle, and it has a much thicker wall. So when we look at this, we're going to use the fact that these two are very different in order to be able to tell the sides of the heart apart. Any questions to this point? Okay, so let's talk about the heart itself. So first of all, we already know where the heart is. I said, remember, there it is in the center, in the middle of the chest, and the lungs are on each side over here. But the heart is not actually in the center of the chest. This is the midline right here. So if I draw this midline, look, there's more heart over here than there is over here. The heart is actually 2/3 to the left of center. 2/3 to the left. So it's not quite in the middle of your chest. It's off to the left side. If we read that thing, it's like this right here. So 2/3 to the left of center. Well, when we see a little bit later on, that's going to have an effect on the lungs because the left lung has less room. And so the left lung is going to be smaller than the right one. And it's because of the position of the heart. Well, we're not talking about lungs right now, but still, when we come back to it, I want you to remember that. If you look at the heart, it's kind of pointy. It looks a little bit like a Valentine's Day heart. Here's sort of a Valentine's Day heart. It looks a little bit like that. And the point of the heart, it points right down toward your left hip. The heart has a sac around it. And the sac looks like this. If you look at it, here's what the sac looks like. It looks like this. It's a thick, kind of almost leathery-like sac. And so this thick, leathery-like sac fits loosely around the heart. Not tightly, but loosely. Look, you can see a bunch of space in here because it's a loose fitting sac. The reason it's loose fitting is because the heart, like a balloon, is going to fill up with blood. And when it fills up, just like a balloon, it has to swell out. And so if this sac was a tight-fitting sac, it could not do that. So it's a loose-fitting sac. The sac is called the pericardium. There it is right there. Peri means around, and heart means, cardium means heart. So it's the pericardium. And look what it does. It attaches this to the diaphragm, this muscle right here. It also attaches to these large blood vessels at the top. So it anchors the heart, it protects the heart. And also remember, it's loose fitting, so the heart can fill up. But if you put enough blood in it, it's going to press against the wall here. So it actually prevents the heart from overfilling. Because if it were to overfill, it could actually rupture, just like a balloon popping. So when we look at it, it looks like this. Tracy says the reference to the heart shape for Valentine's is the reference. Well, we only have one heart. Okay, we only have one heart. What we have is one heart with two pumps. The two pumps, though, are side by side, and so it creates one heart. So it does look like a Valentine's Day heart a little bit. There's one pump and there's one pump, and it's pointy at the bottom. But yeah, we don't have two hearts. We only have one heart. Any other questions? Okay, let's go back to the pericardium again. So this pericardium, look, it's thick, it's tough. It's called fibrous because it's my fibrous connective tissue. So that's the fibrous pericardium. But there's another pericardium inside the fibrous one. That other pericardium is called serous pericardium. And serous, if you remember back from A&P1, serous membranes are things like the pleura, the pericardia, the peritoneum. We've talked about these. And remember, serous membranes are double layered. They're double layered. And an easy way or a good way to picture it is to picture this. Picture yourself blowing up a balloon, tying it off, and then taking your fist and pushing it down into the balloon. Well, your fist is not really in the balloon. Air is in the balloon. But when you push your fist in here, even though it's only one balloon, you create two layers. So you create one layer that's actually touching your fist. That's that layer right there. And you create another layer that's not touching your fist, that one right there. Well, the heart is the same way. So look, here's the heart, and it looks like someone just shoved it down in the balloon, just like a fist. And so there's one layer that's created that touches the heart. And there's one layer that does not touch the heart. Well, the one that touches the heart, the one that touches the fist, is called the visceral layer. So remember, this is a serous membrane. It's got two layers. And the one touching the organ is called visceral. And then there's not touching the organ, and that one is called parietal. So we have a visceral and parietal pericardium. Visceral and parietal pericardium. This is inside the fibrous pericardium. So it's inside it. And so if we look at it, we're going to see layers. So there's the layers right here. So here's the heart right over here. There's the heart. And here's the outside over here. So this is our fibrous pericardium. That's the fibrous one, the thick one, the leather-like one. And then here is this serous pericardium. And again, it has two layers. One layer touches the heart. One layer does not touch the heart. The one that touches the heart is the serous pericardium, the visceral layer. The visceral layer. So that's this one. And the one that does not touch the heart, the serous pericardium, is the parietal layer. So if we go back to this other picture over here, we can see that. So there is our fibrous pericardium. There is our visceral of the serous pericardium. And there is the parietal of the visceral pericardium. And just like with a balloon, there's a little space in between right here. There's also a little space in between right here. Well, our balloon had air in it, but that's not what we find in here. What we find in here is called serous fluid. And serous fluid is very slicky. It has a lot of mucin in it. That's the protein that's found in mucus, and mucin is slicky. It's lubricating. So it acts like a lubricant because these two layers constantly are moving up and down as the heart fills up and empties out. So they slide past each other. And so that layer of lubricant helps to reduce friction. So if we look at this one, here is where that space is, and that's where we're going to have this serous fluid. Any questions about the pericardium? Okay, well, if we look at this serous pericardium, remember it has two layers. It has this parietal layer and it has the visceral layer. Well, the visceral layer is so tightly attached to the heart wall, you can't get it off. It's what makes the heart shiny. If you've ever seen a heart like from the grocery store or someplace, it's shiny. And it's because of this visceral layer, and you cannot get it off. It's like glued on there. And so it actually becomes a layer of the heart. And so if we look over here, that one is actually becomes the outer layer of the heart. And here it is right here. This visceral pericardium is now the outer layer of the heart. And so when we look at the heart, there are three layers. This outer one is this visceral layer of the serous pericardium, but the name changes. Now we call it the epicardium. Epi means on top of. So it's the layer on the outside, on top of the heart. It goes all the way around. And then there's a middle layer right here, and that's where the muscle is. And the prefix for muscle is myo, so that's called the myocardium. And then there's a layer in here which lines the hollow spaces in the heart. It lines the cavities, the chambers. And that's called the endocardium. So we have three layers. We have the epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. Any questions about that? So again, it looks sort of like this. So there's our serous pericardium. Now that becomes this outer layer of the heart. And here are again those three layers of the heart wall: the epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. Well, if we look on one of the models, if we open it up, we should be able to see that. And you can, look. See that really, really, really thin layer right there? It's like paper thin right there. Oops, not there. Right there. It makes it shiny. It's this layer right here. Really, really, really thin. You can see it right there. That's the epicardium. And then from here to here, all the way where this dark red is, that's the myocardium. And then this pink layer, which is this in here, which lines the cavity, the chambers, that's the endocardium. So we can see all three layers in this picture. Everybody see the layers? And again, if you look at it, drawing is there. Same thing. Here's our three layers. Okay, so let's look at the structures of the heart. And let's look at the outside first. So we're going to look at this external anatomy of the heart. So here it is. We're going to use our model. And when we look at this external anatomy, we're going to see some things. It's going to look very, very similar to a real heart. By the way, look at this. This is the space for the right lung. And this is the space for the left lung. Look how much bigger the right lung is than the left lung. And again, that's because the heart is not in the center. It's 2/3 to the left of center. So remember, it looks a little bit like a Valentine's Day heart. And the Valentine's Day heart has a point at the bottom. And so does the heart, the real heart. That's called the apex. So that's this pointy part down at the bottom. That's the apex. So that's this right here. On the posterior side of the heart, the back side of the heart, there's sort of a flat area right here near the top. And that's called the base. The reason it's called that is because if you lay on your back like this, your heart is not like this. It's actually like this. Here's the apex right here. So the apex is very near the chest wall. And right here is the base. So the heart sort of sets on this base. So we have an apex and we have a base. We already talked about how the two sides are different. And that's going to be important to be able to tell left and right, because lots of things are named left or right. Well, the easiest way to figure out left and right is to look at how thick the wall is down here. Look how thick this one is. It's that thick. But look how thick this one is. It's only that thick. Remember, the left side is this high pressure pump. It's going to pump to your head. It's going to pump through tissues. It's going to pump out to your hands and feet and so on. It's a high pressure pump, which means you need a lot of muscle. And we're going to have this much muscle. All of this is cardiac muscle. But if you look at the right side, remember, it's a low pressure pump. We don't need as much pressure because we're not pumping as far. The lungs are really close. Remember, the lungs are filled with air. And so a low pressure does not require as much muscle. And so this is the amount of muscle that we have over here. You can easily see the difference. So That's the way we're going to be able to tell left and right, is by looking at the thickness of these walls. We also need to be able to tell anterior versus posterior. And there's an easy way to do it. If you look, there's a groove that runs, and look on the back side, it runs all the way across. There's this groove here. But on the front side, it's interrupted. Look, it doesn't run all the way across. There's no groove right here. That's a hump. So the anterior looks like this, and the posterior looks like this. Another way to tell them apart is to look at these vessels. So on the anterior, we see these two huge arteries, this huge artery and this huge artery. There's nothing like that over here. So we need to be able to tell anterior from posterior. We need to be able to tell right from left. And when we look at the heart, human hearts, like all mammals and birds, have 4 chambers, 4 hollow spaces. 2 of these are called atria, or atrium is singular. An atrium is sort of like an entryway. If you have an atrium in your house, it's where it comes in. And that's where the blood enters the heart. There are 2 atria. There's a right atrium and a left atrium. Right atrium, left atrium. So that's 2 chambers. We also have 2 chambers which are called ventricles. And a ventricle is a pumping chamber. It pumps, which means we're going to have muscle down here. And again, there are 2 of these. There's a right ventricle and a left ventricle. And if we were to open them up, we would see that this one here, the wall is thinner. Thin wall over here. Same thing on here, thin wall. But this one is going to have a much thicker wall. Thick. Another thing we have is if we look at the atria, they have these little weird little parts right here on the front that are supposed to look a little bit like dog's ears. Well, the word for ear is auricle. That's what we call the ears on our head, auricle. So this little part right here is an auricle. This little part right here is an auricle. Well, auricles are expansion chambers. In other words, they only open up and fill up when we have a lot of blood coming to the heart. So if you're just resting or sleeping or doing something like that, they tend to be like this. They're closed off. But if you start exercising, more blood's going to come into the heart, and what's going to happen is this is going to open up like that so that there's more room for blood inside the heart. This is another way to tell anterior from posterior, because the auricles are only on the front. They're not on the back. You don't have anything like that. We have 4 chambers. Well, these chambers are separated by grooves. So there's a groove that separates the atria from the ventricles. That's called the atrioventricular groove. It's also called the coronary sinus. And look, it goes all the way around, except in the very, very front right here. It's that groove that we saw. And this groove has blood vessels in it. Look, if we remove those drawings, you can see the blood vessels in here. So there are arteries in here, and there are veins in here that run around this atrioventricular groove all the way around, except right here. We also have a groove that separates the two ventricles on the both sides. So this groove here is between ventricles, and so we call it that means between, interventricular groove. Now another word for groove is sulcus. So they're also sometimes called sulcus. But there's one on the front. Remember the word for front is anterior. There it is right there. There's one on the back. Remember the word for back is posterior, and there it is right there. And look, blood vessels are also located in these as well. So we're going to have arteries, and we're going to have these veins as well. Arteries, and we're going to have veins. Any questions? Okay, well, remember we have 4 chambers. And they're 4 completely separate chambers. There's no mixing of blood between these chambers. Well, the only way you can have that happen is if there's a wall between the chambers. And there is. There's a solid wall. A solid wall between the 2 ventricles and a solid wall between the 2 atria. So if you draw it, it looks like this. Here's the solid wall right here. And if you look down here, it looks like this. And here's the solid wall right here. So look, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 separate chambers. Well, the word for wall is septum. So there's a septum between ventricles, and so it's called the interventricular septum. There's a septum between the atria, so it's called the interatrial septum. So if I were to draw it again, here's my interatrial septum right here. It's a solid wall. And if I were to draw this one again, here is my interventricular septum. It's a solid wall, and there's no openings, no space, solid wall. Does it make sense? Okay, well, let's continue on and look now at the inside of the heart. So if you look here, remember there are 4 chambers. And remember, this is the anterior. We can tell that easily because, remember, we can see this here in the front. There are these vessels. That's the anterior side. Well, if this is anterior, then this has to be the right, and this has to be the left. We can also just look at the thickness of the walls right here. There's the thick wall right there. That's the left. There's the thin wall right there. That's the right. So we should be able to pick out these individual chambers. So here's the right atrium. There's the right atrium. There's the right ventricle. You can't really see it on the inside, but there's the left atrium. We can see our little dog ear-like thing right there. There's the left atrium, and there's the left ventricle. Well, if we look in here in the inside, when I draw it like this, and it looks smooth inside, but it's not like that. There are lots of little bitty ridges in here. little bitty ridges inside. And if you look at the ventricles, the ridges are even bigger ridges. These ridges are a little bit like the same reason we have fingerprints. Look at your fingers. If you look at your finger, the ball of your finger is going to look something like this. You're going to have swirls and things like that, and you're going to have a fingerprint. Why do we have fingerprints? Anybody know? Is it so the cops can catch you if you do something wrong? Is that why? No, that's not why. Why do we have fingerprints? Anybody want to guess? Yeah, exactly. Soon says it's for grip. That's exactly right. They're called friction ridges is what they're called. And they help you to do something like pick up a dime or something like that. Well, guess what? The heart has friction ridges on the inside. That's what these things are here. And when you look at it, depending on if you're talking about the atrium or the ventricle, they have different names. In the atrium, it's called pectinate muscle. So see these ridges in here? That's those fingerprint-like things. That's pectinate muscle. In the ventricles, they're even bigger, and they're called trabeculae. Trabeculae carni. Carni means meat. So these are meaty. And trabeculae means literally ridges. So they're meaty ridges. And you can see them there. All these little things that you see poking out there, those are those trabeculae carni. And they're just like for the fingerprints, what they do is they allow us to grip the blood, provides friction so that you can grip the blood, so that you can push it easier. So look, here's the pectinate right here. See those ridges all over the place. There's some more over there and some more over there. Remember, that's in the atrium. Pectinate is in the atria. And then if you look down in the ventricles, there's these ridges down here. Look, you can see these ventricles. That's the trabeculae carni. And again, that's inside the ventricles. Here's another picture. There they are right there. Make sense? Any questions? Okay, well, remember the heart, the whole job of the heart is to pump blood. It's to pump. So look, I could make a pump. I could use I don't know, a syringe and make a pump. So in other words, when I push down on this syringe, it's going to force something back. So if I got, let's say I have this thing submerged in liquid. So when I push here, the liquid's going to go out. But what happens when I pull the chain, the piston back? The liquid's just going to come back in. And then I push it, and the liquid's going to go out. And then I pull it, and the liquid's going to come back in. In other words, it's not going to go anywhere. That's exactly what would happen with the heart if you just pushed and then relaxed, pushed and relaxed. It wouldn't go anywhere. In order to keep the liquid, the blood from coming backwards, we have to have valves. And there are 4 valves in the heart, and here they are. 2 of them look a little bit like parachutes. Think about what a parachute looks like. So if you look at a parachute, it looks like something like this. And then it's got these strings that hang down like this. And then it's attached to something like that. Person, a basket, a package, whatever. Looks like parachutes. These look like parachutes. And then there are 2 others, these right here, that look, to me anyway, look like a personal pan pizza. You've ever gone somewhere and you've gotten a pan pizza, a little 6-inch pizza or whatever, and they cut it into pieces? It looks like that. Tracy says like a jellyfish. It is like a jellyfish, except jellyfish don't have anything down here at the bottom. But you can use that if you want to. But that's what they look like. So 4 valves. So the 2 that look like jellyfish, the 2 that look like parachutes are called AV valves. AV valve. AV stands for atrioventricular because that's exactly where they're located between the atrium and the ventricle. So they're called atrioventricular valves. So look, there's the left atrium right there, and there's the left ventricle right there. So they're between the left atrium and left ventricle. Same thing's true over here. There's the right atrium and right ventricle, and it's between the right atrium and right ventricle. And so we call them by that same name. So we have the left AV valve and the right AV valve. And then the 2 that look like little personal pan pizzas, they don't have these little strings that hang down or anything like that. They actually look like 3 little half moons. Now, I don't think they look so much like a half moon, but that's what people think that they look like. Well, half moon, the word for that is semi-lunar. And so that's exactly what they're called, semi-lunar valves or SL valves. They're named for their location. Now, we haven't done this yet, but this is an artery called the aorta. And so that valve is located right there in the aorta, the very beginning of the aorta. It goes like that. And this valve is located right here in the middle, in the beginning of this artery. And this is the pulmonary trunk. And so the names have this, is the same as the vessel. So the one in the aorta is the aortic semilunar valve. The one in the pulmonary trunk is the pulmonary semilunar valve. So 4 valves. Well, let's look at them a little bit closer. Let's look at those 2 AV valves first. If you look at the AV valves, remember that means atrioventricular. They don't look exactly the same. Now, in this model, it's really hard to tell them apart. But one of those valves, if you look at it from the top, looks like this. And the other one, if you look at it from the top, looks like this. And look, they have little cups. And the word for cup is cusp. So look, they have these little cusps. It's a hard word to say. But anyway, if we count how many cusps they have, it's different. If we look at the left AV valve, it only has 2 cusps. So it's the one that looks like this. And the prefix for 2 is bi, so it's called the bicuspid valve. But if we look at the one on the right, it's the one that looks like this. And if we count how many little cusps it has 3, or tricuspid valve. Does it make sense? So not only are they called left and right AV valves, they're also called bicuspid and tricuspid valves. And then this one has even another name. Because when you look at that valve, remember it looks like this, sort of like that. Somebody thought that looked like the hat that a bishop wears. Have you ever seen a bishop? They have these tall hats. So here's the guy, and he's got this tall hat that looks like that. That tall hat is called a mitre. So not only is this called the left AV valve, and it's called the bicuspid valve, it's also called the mitral valve. Now, of all three names, this one is the dumbest, but believe it or not, it's also the one that's most used in medicine. So if you're going to stay in medicine, this is the word you're going to hear all the time: mitral valve, mitral valve. Well, of the three names, like I said, it's not the best one. Any questions? So this one has three names, and this one has two names. Any questions? Well, not only does the valve, remember they look like a parachute, or someone said jellyfish. And so there are these strings that hang down just like you have on a parachute or tentacles on a jellyfish. These strings are tiny little tendons. Remember, tendons are made out of dense, regular connective tissue, so they're very strong. They're little tiny tendons. And what they do is they connect the valve. So here's the valve itself. They connect the valve to little bitty outcroppings of muscle. So down here, there are little outcroppings of muscle. And these little outcroppings of muscle look like nipples. And so that's what these strings, these tendons are attached to. And here they are right here. They look like nipples. And the word for nipple is papilla. So they're called papillary muscles. So we have the valve, we have the chordae tendons, and we have the papillary muscles. And that's true on both sides. Now this one's the bicuspid, but it's also true for the tricuspid. So if we look at there's the valve right there. All right, there's the valve. There's the chordae tendons. And if we follow those down, we're going to get to papillary muscles. So there's the valve, there's the chordae tendons, and there's the papillary muscles. Does it make sense to everyone? Any questions? Again, that's true for both AV valves. There, and you can see it right there too. Here's the right one. Again, these models, you can't count cusps. Remember, this one only has has three cusps, and this one is the tricuspid valve, or the right AV valve. And we're going to have chordae tendons, and down here we're going to have papillary muscles. Any questions? Well, in the lecture about the heart, when we talk about how things work, you get to talk, or I talk about what these things do. But just in a short few sentences, the job of these papillary muscles and these chordae tendons is to support the valve, because we're going to be pushing blood really, really, really hard against this valve. We're going to push it like this. And if the valve were weak, the valve would open and blood would just go on through. But the valve is closed to keep the blood from going backwards. And so what these are going to do is they're going to support the valve. They're going to steady the valve to keep it from regurgitating. Any questions? Here's the top of this valve so you can count the flaps. Look, 1, 2, 3. Now right now the valve's open, so blood can go through it. But 3 cusps, tricuspid. So this is our right AV valve. So look, here's kind of a demonstration of what I was just talking about. So blood gets pushed against the valve, and the valve closes. But if the valve were weak, this would just open up and the blood would leak out. It would go out through here. So to prevent that from happening, these muscles and these chordae tendons pull backwards so they can steady the valve. They don't open it, they don't close it. They steady the valve. So there's those valves. Let's look at the other 2 valves. Let's look at the aortic and pulmonary semilunar valves. Here's what those valves look like. So they're just very thin flaps of tissue. Look at it. There it is right there. Thin flaps of tissue. They have little cups, just like the others. And they're not really called cusps. We don't use that term here, but they are. That's what they are. And the blood catches in this little cup, and that's what makes the valve close. There are no little helpers for these valves. So there's no chordae tendons, and there's no papillary muscles. They're just all on their own. But most of the time they work just fine. But remember, they're supposed to look like half moons, and that's why they're called semilunar valves. And then remember, they're named for the artery they're located in. Any questions? Okay, well, attached to the heart are going to be blood vessels. So let's look at these blood vessels. Now, these are large ones, and so sometimes they're called the great vessels of the heart. So that means these up here, not these little ones down here, but these big ones. So the great vessels of the heart, if you look on the left side, there's a single artery that comes out of the left side, and that single artery is called the aorta. It is the largest artery in your whole body. It's the largest. And look at it. If you look at it in diameter, it's about 1 inch. 1 inch. That's how big it is. And it's a long artery. It starts at the heart, but it makes this curve and goes through the chest, and it goes all the way down through the abdomen. And then it splits down at the very bottom. Well, it's a long artery, and so different sections of it have different names. And so here's the very beginning of it right here. And so the blood is going this way. The blood is going up. So it's called the ascending aorta. And then it makes a curve like this. There's an arch. So that's the arch of the aorta, our aortic arch. And then it starts heading down. And so it's going to head down this way. And that's the descending aorta. Now you can't see it on this model, but then it becomes the thoracic aorta. And then it's going to pass through the diaphragm, a muscle, and then it's going to become the abdominal aorta. So It's a long artery, and it has these different sections. But that's the only artery that comes out of this left ventricle over here. Remember, there's a valve. There's a valve right there. It goes this way. If you look at the top of this artery, look, there are 3 branches that come off the top. So here's the arch. And at the top of the arch are 3 arteries. So over here is the right, over here is the left. So this artery, the one on the right, it's also the largest, is the brachiocephalic. This one over here on the left, the far left, is the left subclavian. And the one in the middle is the left common carotid. So if we look at where the blood goes, look, brachio means arm, and cephalic means head. So this goes to your arm and your head on the right side. This one is subclavian. That means below the clavicle. That goes to the arm on the left side. And this one is the common carotid. It goes to your head on the left side. So 3 large arteries up at the top. If we look on the right side, here's the right side, there's a single artery that comes out of there too, and that's the pulmonary trunk. Now look, it's blue. So a lot of people would look at that and think that's not an artery, that's a vein, but it is an artery. Remember, blue does not mean artery and vein, it means low oxygen blood. So it's still an artery, it's just carrying low oxygen blood. Any questions? We also have veins. So remember, the veins are going to enter the atria. So the veins drain into the atria. And so if we look at the left side, here's the left atrium. There are 4 veins. 4. And they come from the lungs, so they're called pulmonary veins. If we look on the right side, here's the right side. There are 2 veins, one on the top, that's called the superior vena cava, and one on the bottom, that's called the inferior vena cava. So, same thing, but with the big one. There's that aorta, ascending, the arch, descending, which you can't see very well. There's our pulmonary trunk. It's also going to split when you get up here a little further. And then here are our veins. There's the superior vena cava. So down here somewhere is going to be the inferior vena cava. There's the, at least 1 or 2 of the pulmonary veins. Any questions? Well, those are the great vessels of the heart. But there are also these smaller vessels on the heart. So if I look here, look, these are smaller. These are smaller. And they're going to the heart itself. In other words, the heart has its own little miniature circulatory system. And when you look at it, it looks a little bit like a crown. So if this is the heart, it makes like a crown around the heart. It goes like this, and then like this. So flip that upside down, it looks a little bit like a tiara that somebody might wear or something. And the word for crown is coronary. So the coronary circulation is this crown of vessels around the heart. And they supply the heart wall with oxygen and nutrients, and they remove waste products. We have both arteries and veins. So here's what it looks like. If you flip this upside down, that would be the crown right there. So there are two coronary arteries. There's two of them. And they're the very first two branches off the aorta. So the aorta, remember, is going to come out of the left ventricle, and the blood's going to go out to the body. So it's going to go up to the head. It's going to go down to the legs, the arms, all of that. But before it goes hardly anywhere, there's going to be two arteries that branch off. They're the very first two branches off of this aorta. Those are the coronary arteries. And there's one on the right side, and there's one on the left side. So we have a right coronary artery, and we have a left coronary artery. And then look, if we follow them, they're going to branch and they're going to go around the heart. So let's look at the right coronary and left coronary arteries. So look, there's our aorta right there. And here's the first branch on one side. There's the first branch on the other side. Again, they're the first two branches right here. Well, if we look at the right one, it just comes out and you can see it very easily. But the left one goes behind the pulmonary trunk. So you don't see much of it until it gets right here. And that's exactly what we see in this picture. So look, that one we can see very easily. But look, this one went behind the pulmonary trunk. Here's the pulmonary. There it is right there. It went behind it. So this one is the right, and this one is the left. So we look at it here. There's the right, and there's the left. Well, let's look at the right coronary artery. So that's this one. And let's look at it in this picture. So it just comes off and it goes around, and it goes all the way around the heart. All the way around the right side. And then it goes down the back side of the heart. So look, it goes all the way around and then down. It's here on the edge of the heart, a branch comes off right here. So what we're going to see is this artery goes all the way around. This artery that goes down the back side, and then this branch that comes off right here. And so if we look at that, that's exactly what we're going to see. There's the right coronary, and it's going to go all the way around. Look, it keeps coming all the way around. And then here it's going to go down the back side. And when it goes down the back side right here, its name changes. It's not the right coronary anymore. It's the posterior, remember that means behind, interventricular, between the ventricles. So it's the red one here. And look, it makes this little loop-like thing. And then remember, there was a branch that came off, and that branch is right here. That is called the marginal artery. So if we go back to our picture again, There's the right coronary. Here's the marginal right here. And then it's going to go around, and there's the posterior interventricular right there. So right goes all the way around and then comes this way. And then posterior interventricular and marginal. If we look at the left, remember the left went behind here. So we can't really see that part of it because it's behind this pulmonary trunk. So the very first place that we see it is right there. And what it's going to do is it's going to go down, and another part's going to go around. So we go back to our picture again. There it is behind the pulmonary trunk. And then it comes out right here. And then one part's going to go down the front of the heart. And one part's going to go around the left side. So when we look at it, we're going to see exactly that. So, oops. There's our left coronary. Remember, it goes behind here. And then right here, it's going to split. And it's going to go like this. And we're going to get the anterior interventricular and the circumflex. It's going to go around the left side. Here it is on that big model, a little bit easier, a little bit harder, depending on how you look at it. Any questions? Let's go back to our picture one more time, and we'll review it real quick. So, right coronary, long artery, goes all the way around to the back side. And then here is our marginal right here. And there's our posterior interventricular right there. And then if we look at the left one goes behind the pulmonary trunk till it gets right here. And then it's going to split. And we're going to get the anterior interventricular and the circumflex. Make sense? Any questions? And then if you look at it on the heart model, look, you get smaller branches. There's thousands of these tiny little branches because they got to feed all of this muscle. So it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until we get down to the muscle itself. We also have to have veins to bring the blood back. And so we also have this venous circulation. Well, veins start out small and they merge and they get bigger. And then another one comes along and they merge and they get even bigger. And they get bigger and they get bigger. So veins are going to start out here. And then they're going to get big over here. Well, the veins have easy names. They're just great, middle, and small. So if we look at them, the great one, great is the biggest. It's going to start here on the anterior side of the heart. And it's going to go up right here. And it's going to curl around and it's going to come around to the back side. The middle starts right here on the back side of the heart. And it's going to run up the back side of the heart right here. And the small is going to start on the right side and go this way. And then they're all going to meet up, and they're going to meet up at this vessel, which is called the coronary sinus. So we have the great, the middle, the small, and the coronary sinus. And then the coronary sinus is going to empty into the right atrium. So if we look at this on the models, they look like this. So here's our great. These are blue. It's going to start here and go this way. Remember, they're going to merge and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it's going to go around like that, and it's going to keep coming until it gets about right there. And then here's the middle. Remember, it starts out small, merge, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until we're going to reach that right there. And then here's the small over here. The small is on this side. And it's going to run around this way until it gets over here. And then remember, they're all going to empty into this coronary sinus. So the great is going to empty into the coronary sinus. The middle is going to empty into the coronary sinus. And the small is going to empty into the coronary sinus. And then that is going to empty into the right atrium. So if we look right here, inside, we look in there and look right here, we should see a hole, because there's should be an opening to the coronary sinus right here, like a hole. And so if we look at, there it is. Make sense? Any questions? So what we've been looking at is an adult heart. So every one of you, this is what your heart looks like, what we've been talking about. But when you were a fetus, when you were inside your mother's womb, think about it. Here's your mother, and here you are in her mother's womb, little guy here. They're usually upside down, sort of. Anyway, there they are. So think about this. Where is this fetus getting its oxygen? Does a fetus breathe air? Does it breathe air? No, it doesn't breathe air. It gets it from the placenta, exactly. There's an umbilical cord and there's a placenta. So if you look at the lungs of a fetus, the lungs are basically non-functional. They're full of liquid. They're not really working at all. They're not working. And so it does not make any sense to send half of its blood to the lungs when they're really not doing anything. So the fetus has two adaptations. And what these adaptations do, they shunt blood. They make less blood go to the lungs and more blood go in the other direction. They shunt blood away from the lungs. And so not half its blood goes to the lungs. Most of it's going to be shunted away. And the two adaptations are that there is a hole, an actual hole between the two atria. And the word for hole, if you remember back from from AMP1, is foramen. And it's oval shaped, so it's called foramen ovale. And so blood gets shunted this way. It goes through the hole from the right to the left. From the right to the left. So less blood goes to the lungs. And then there's another one. There's an actual vessel right here that connects the pulmonary trunk to the aorta. That is called the ductus arteriosus. And the ductus arteriosus shunts blood from the pulmonary trunk into the aorta. So less blood goes to the lungs. So there are these two adaptations, the foramen ovale and the ductus arteriosus. And again, they both shunt blood away from lungs because the lungs aren't working. But think of what happens when the baby's born. As soon as the baby's born, its lungs are going to fill up with air, and it's going to have to start supplying its own oxygen. It's not going to be connected to the placenta anymore. So now these two shunts are bad things because we don't want the blood to be shunted away from the lungs. We want the blood now to go to our lungs. So with the baby's very first breath, two things happen. This hole closes up, and so does this vessel. It closes up. We get a reflex, and the muscles contract, and those muscles are going to close it up. And when the muscles close it up, no more blood can go that way. So now the blood goes to the lungs the way it's supposed to. And then pretty quickly what's going to happen is we're going to fill this in with connective tissue. So we're going to fill it in, almost like a scar is going to grow. And that connective tissue is going to prevent any leakage. And that connective tissue is going to stay there your entire life. And we can see it on an adult heart. So there's connective tissue right here. And there's connective tissue right here that we can actually see. But remember, the hole is closed now. This is closed now. So the blood goes to the lungs like we want it to. Well, you can always see what's left over from this hole and left over from this vessel. Even though they're not there anymore, you can see a remnant of them, that connective tissue. So the foramen ovale becomes the fossa ovalis. And the ductus arteriosus becomes ligamentum arteriosum. So we've been looking at adult hearts, so we should be able to see these two things because they're always there on an adult heart. And so if we look on our models, we can see them. So remember, that hole is not the foramen ovale. That's the opening to the coronary sinus. And that gotta have. That's not what we're talking about. That's what drains the heart blood from the veins. Right here, though, in a fetus, there's another hole, that foramen ovale. But look, it closed up. And you can see it. See all that white stuff there? That is connective tissue. And so the connective tissue filled in the hole. And so it's not a hole, but it's a depression. You can see it. It's sunk in. And so on a real heart, you can find it. On the models, you can find it. Same thing is true for, and there it is right there. There's this depression right there. That's connective tissue, the fossa ovalis. Remember, there was also a vessel that connected the pulmonary trunk to the aorta. So blood could go this way. But when we take our first breath, this is going to close up as well. And what's going to happen is it's going to fill in with connective tissue. And so we can see it right there too. That's connective tissue where it filled in. So that's this ligamentum arteriosum. So we can see the fossa ovalis, which is a remnant of the foramen ovale. And we can see the ligamentum arteriosum, which is a remnant of the ductus arteriosus. Any questions about that? Okay. So that's the anatomy of the heart. But remember, the heart is a pump. It's a pump, and its job is to pump blood. And in order to pump, it has to contract, and then it has to relax. So it has to go through this cycle of contraction and relaxing over and over and over again. Well, there are nerves which run to the heart. So there are nerves that come down from the brain to the heart. 2 sets of them. And those nerves help to regulate the heart. But those nerves do not make the heart beat. I can actually cut these nerves. Just cut them and completely away so they're not there anymore. There's no connection between brain and heart. And the heart will still pump. So the heart beats all by itself. Every little part of the heart muscle will beat by itself. But the weird thing is, different parts of the heart beat at different rates. So this part might be fast, and this part might be slow. And this part right here next to it might be fast, and this part might be slow, and this part might be medium, and this part be fast. It beats at different rates. So we need something to make sure that the whole heart is beating together. The whole heart must act like a unit. It must work together. And so there has to be some system to make that happen. And the system that does that is called the conduction system of the heart. So it's a built-in system that regulates the beat. So it initiates the beat, it starts it, and it spreads it across the surface of the heart so that everything beats like a unit. It must work together. Otherwise, it would not be a very efficient pump. So if you look inside the heart, it's got this built-in conduction system. Now you might think that these things look like nerves, but they're not nerves. They're not nerves. They're not nervous tissue. They're specialized muscle tissue. Specialized muscle. And this specialized muscle is going to initiate the heartbeat and spread the heartbeat through the heart. It's going to initiate the action potential of the heart. And it's going to spread that action potential down here and back up till it gets to where it needs to go. And the action potential is what's going to make the muscle contract. Well, it starts with a node of tissue on the right atrium. It's called the SA node or sinoatrial node. And the SA node sets the pace for the heart. It sets the speed. It sets the pace. And so it's called the pacemaker. So it is the natural pacemaker of the heart. What's going to happen next is the action potentials that are created here are going to spread, and they're going to spread across the surface of the atria, all across the atria. But they can't spread down here because there's connective tissue. There's a band of connective tissue right here that separates the atria from the ventricles. And that connective tissue does not spread action potentials. So we're going to have some way of crossing the connective tissue. And that's what all of this is all about. So what's going to happen next is this action potential, which spread over the atria, is going to be picked up by this. And that's another node of tissue. Remember, this was the SA node. This one is the AV node or atrioventricular node. Here's our connective tissue right here. All this is where the connective tissue is. So we're going to have to cross over this connective tissue. And what crosses over is this. It's called the AV bundle. And it's like a bridge that crosses this connective tissue. The AV bundle. Sometimes it's called the bundle of His. And then the AV bundle is going to go down. It's going to go all the way to the tip of the heart. And then it's going to turn around and come back up. So first, that AV bundle is going to split. And we're going to get two bundle branches, a right one and a left one. So here's a branch and here's a branch. And then it's going to go all the way down to the apex of the heart. And then it's going to divide and split and go back up. And it goes back up as the Purkinje fibers. And so that's going to spread the action potential all the way through the heart so the heart can beat as a unit. So again, we're going to start with this SA node. And it's going to go over the atria. And then the AV node. The AV bundle. Remember, that's going to cross the connective tissue down into the ventricles. And then the bundle branches. And all the way down to the bottom and back up as the Purkinje fibers. So that's the conduction system of the heart. So if we look on the model, we can see those nodes. So there's our SA node. Remember, that's this one. It's in the right atrium. So this is the right atrium right here. And there's our AV node. There's the AV node in the right atrium, right next to where it joins onto the ventricle. So there's the AV node right there, right where it joins onto the ventricle. And then we're going to go from the SA node and the AV node. Remember, it's going to come down. We're going to pass through that connective tissue. And you can see it right there, that white thing that we see. That is the AV bundle. So there's our AV bundle right there. Now you can't see much of it on the model, but that's it. That's the AV bundle. And then remember, it's going to split. So one goes to the right, and one's going to go this way to the left. Those are the bundle branches. Now the rest of it's microscopic, and so they didn't put it on the models. Remember, what's going to happen is it's going to go all the way down and then back up as the Purkinje fibers. Any questions? Well, remember, action potentials are electricity. So we're getting action potentials here. And remember, that's electricity. It's an electricity, and it's going to spread, and we're going to have electricity, and it's going to spread, and we're going to have electricity, 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 all going through the heart. Well, we can take a voltmeter and measure electricity. And when we do that, what we're going to see is the pattern of the electricity moving through the heart looks like this. It's called an ECG or an EKG. It stands for electrocardiogram. So electro, electricity, cardio, heart, and then gram means picture. So it's a picture of the electricity, electrocardiogram, a picture of the electricity in the heart. Well, the very first guy who did this was a guy named Einthoven. And what Einthoven found was he found that lots of things emitted electricity, and he had invented this machine to detect it, and he ran around putting it on everything. And he found out that if you put it on a human or a dog or some other animal like that, if you put electrodes and you had the heart in sort of a triangle, where the electrode was over here and the electrode was here and the electrode was here, so it was in sort of a triangle, you always got this exact same picture. And it had these waves. Look, there's a wave, there's a wave, there's a wave, there's another one, and another one. Exactly the same way every single time, unless something was wrong. And so he decided to name these waves. Well, he decided to use the letters of the alphabet. But he didn't start with A, he started with P. So this is the P wave, this is the Q wave, the R wave, the S wave, and the T wave. Well, these letters don't stand for anything, but they do represent things. And here's what they represent. So the P wave represents atrial depolarization. Remember, an action potential has two parts, depolarizing and repolarizing. And so the P wave is the depolarization of the atria. And then we get repolarization of the atria. But it happens at the same time that the ventricles depolarize. So this represents two things: atrial repolarization and ventricular depolarization. And because the ventricles are much, much bigger than the atria, this part gets hidden. You can't see it, it's hidden. And then the T wave represents the repolarization of the ventricles. Now there's a whole lot more about the ECG and all of that in the lecture portion of this. But you still, even for lab, I'd like you to be able to label an ECG, know which wave is which, and also know the meaning of the ECG. What do these waves mean? So when we look at an ECG, it looks like this. So this is a plain old normal ECG. And so look, there's a P wave, Q, R, S, and T. P, Q, R, S, and T, over and over and over again. And look, each one of them looks exactly the same as the one before it. So here is one ECG right there. And there's another ECG right there. And so on. And if I count how many of these happen in 1 minute, then I know the heart rate, because we get one ECG per beat. But not all ECGs look like this. When things go wrong with the heart, we can see it in the ECG. So look, if you look at this one, see if you can figure out what's wrong with it. Try. What do you think's wrong with this? Remember, a normal one looks like this. What's wrong with this one? Anybody want to guess? No P wave, exactly. Look, there's no P wave, no P wave, no P wave. We have a Q, and we have an R, and we have an S, and we have a T, but there's no P wave. In other words, this person, their SA node is not working. The SA node is not working. So the person in charge, or the thing in charge of this person's heart, is the AV node. And if you count how many of these beats there are in a minute, you think it's as many as this is in a minute? It's a lot fewer. This person probably has a heart rate of around 40 or something. And so this person, even though their heart is beating, 40 is not enough to supply all of your needs. So this person would be a good candidate for an artificial pacemaker. So an artificial pacemaker is going to take over the job of the SA node, the natural pacemaker. Look at this one and see if you can figure out what's wrong with it. So look right here, that looks normal. P, Q, R, S, T. But look, there's a wave, and then nothing happened. And then we have a normal P, Q, R, S, and T right there. And then look, we had a P, and then nothing happened. Well, this is called heart block. And what's happening is, remember, if we go back to this over here, there's a bridge right here. That bridge is what passes the action potential from the AV node down to the ventricles. Think of this like a, I don't know, like a 12-lane highway or something. So if you think about a 12-lane highway, there's a lot of lanes for a lot of traffic. And you probably have driven on something like this. But what happens if there's construction? So I don't know, there's something messed up, and here's construction, look. So this whole thing, there's construction. So look what had to happen. These 12 lanes, 8 lanes, whatever it is, all the traffic has to go just through this little 2 lanes or 1 lane. And so the traffic slows down. And some traffic may not get through at all. And that's exactly what happens here. There's damage here. And so some action potentials get through, but some do not. And so when we look at CG, we can actually see that. This one got through. This one did not. This one got through. This one did not. There are 3 degrees of heart block. Third being the most dangerous or the worst. And in third degree heart block, no action potentials get through. None of them make it through. Any questions? So here are those. Oops, sorry, thought another slide in here. So here are those ECGs. Any questions? Look at this ECG. Look at it. What do you think is going on here? Does anybody see a P wave or a QRS or a T? There aren't any. So what's happening with this heart is that conduction system has quit working. So remember, this part's fast and this part's slow and this part's medium and this part's fast and this part's slow. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing all the different parts of the heart beating at their own rate. And this has been described as, if you look at the heart doing this, it looks like a bag full of worms. So it just sits there and wiggles, basically. It's not working like a pump. This is called fibrillation. And fibrillation does not pump any blood. And so if you don't fix it, this person's going to die. And so you probably have seen on TV or anything where they use paddles and they shock the heart. You can use external paddles and shock through the chest wall. But you can also use internal paddles if your chest wall is open and shock the heart itself. And what it does is it stops the heart. So in other words, this part that's going fast, this part that's going slow, this part that's going medium, it stops all of it. And then hopefully the SA node will come back online and start taking over again. Any questions? Okay, and then there's one last thing and we'll be done for today. So in the lecture part of this, we're going to talk a lot about the cardiac cycle, and we're going to use this thing here. This is called a Wiggers diagram. Wiggers was a guy's name. There's our EKG or ECG. But look, what else is going to happen? We're going to see relaxation and contraction and relaxation and contraction. We're going to see pressures go up and pressures go down. We're going to see blood volume go up and blood volume go down. We can see all of that on this one particular picture. And there's a nice picture of this in exercise 30. I think it's in exercise 30. Maybe it's exercise 33. But anyway, you can find this in the review exercises. And so even though you won't be tested on it in lab, there's a nice picture of it. And so when you go to listen to the lecture PowerPoint or lecture part of the class, this class, then get out your lab book and turn to this and see if you can find it, so you'll have one. Any questions? So that's as much as I have for you today. So we're going to stop there. A quiz will become available later today for the heart, and you can do that. Hopefully you've been keeping up with the other quizzes. Everybody doing okay with the quizzes? Any questions about any of it? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.